Okay, it's time to continue on the exploration of preamplifiers, and we are looking at the power supply. So this is a block diagram of the units inside your preamplifier's power supply, and and I made it in such a way that each block represents a unit that affects the sound, and if you change that unit you can hear a change in sound quality. And of course, if you change a single unit, the change in the sound quality will be not very big. But when you add all of them up together, that's a monstrous change. And whether you can hear that change or not, what is the extent of which those changes are audible, is up to the rest of your audio system. If it's not a revealing system, it will not reveal what's going on inside the preamplifier. But if you have a very revealing system, it's enough to change a fuse and you can hear the changes. And you don't even need to change a fuse. Just flip the fuse orientation. Take out your fuse and put it in the other way around. If you can hear the change, then your system is pretty revealing. If you cannot, it means that there's still more of the journey to go if you want to proceed. And I suspect you would, because otherwise you would not be watching my channel. So going back to the power supplies, the number one thing in it is the IEC socket. So basically this is where you plug your power cord to, and that's the first thing that's going to affect or limit your preamplifier's sound. And then there's the wire that carries the electricity to the fuse, and another wire, power switch, wire, rectifier. Now the wiring scheme here is and then how these units are connected, it really changes from preamplifier to preamplifier. But I can tell you guys that unless it's a nice preamplifier with hardwired parts, most units which are commercially made use something molded onto PCBs, molded. I missed here the fuse holder and then the fuse in it. And often just changing the holder that holds the fuse is a bigger change than changing the fuse itself, because the fuse holders typically have very junky metals in it. And these things, just the even the socket, the fuse, the power switch, so even before we get to any parts that starts to affect the sound in an active level, just this passive thing, just conducting the signal through these elements, the electricity, the line AC, already degrades and limits the potential of the preamplifier tremendously. But this is true for DACs and power amps, anything, phonostage, everything. Just these things are massively overlooked in most cases, and in most commercial products, people just do their best to just adhere to the codes, to the mandatory certifications required to sell electronics products, and just use mass manufactured molded parts, which are absolute horrid junk. And you can do a great service for yourself and for the sound you listen to if you ditch all of that and install direct parts, discrete high quality parts. And for example, that was what I showed in the DAC update that I did for the PS Audio DAC. I ditched that horrific ghastly molded parts and that part of the signal, and I installed some higher quality components, and it really came up as a massive change in the sound of the unit. So basically what I'm noticing here is that I left out the power transformer. So before we hit the rectifier, there is a power transformer there, and that alters the incoming voltage to the voltage that your preamplifier is going to use for that specific power supply. So here there's one more block in there, and that's the power transformer plus the wire that carries the signal to the rectifier. Now the rectifier transforms the AC voltage to choppy DC, and now we need the filtering in your preamplifier's power supply to make it a smooth DC, and usually that's done by a capacitor at the first position and then a wire connected to an inductor or resistor or a regulator. So now I'm not showing anything anymore because it just gets repetitive and it can get very diverse at this point, but up to this point almost everything is just the same in whatever preamp you are looking at that you can purchase. One thing can be different is if the cap is omitted here and it goes directly to an inductor, then that's a choke input power supply, and that's seen at almost no audio gear that you can buy. Very few of the preamps have choke inputs, and most of them are just absolutely orbital in their prices, and not because choke input has to be orbitally priced, but because it requires a higher level of sophistication to employ it, and when and that also adds to the price, and when and usually people don't want to afford like a few $100s plus, or maybe like even $100 plus at lower level equipment. So if you make like a choke input power supply for a preamplifier, and then you are making it to a price point where it's going to just hemorrhage money from your company, because the company will try to sell it at competitive prices, and of course they cannot compete with all the junk and all the mass marketed lower quality stuff there, because it's not primary the sound quality that sells a unit, but it's the marketing and the aura around it. And of course you can say that there's a lot of stuff which are excellent value for the money, and that's absolutely true, and it sounds great for that money. But if we would up the quality a little bit, for example using choke input filtering instead of cap input, then the sound quality would be even higher. And that part of the commercial segment where people don't want to compromise the sound quality too much, then things just get silly expensive, because you need to use dedicated parts instead of having everything on a single bloody mold on just on a PCB, crammed onto a PCB with questionable quality connections and insulators and everything. So basically this is the gist of what's going on in a power supply. Now for power supplies, actually I just showed it as if it was one power supply, but every preamp has multiple power supplies inside, and at lower cost units everything is shared. So basically there's a transformer here, and the transformer has multiple secondary windings feeding multiple rectifiers, and this part going down here, there's an array of these. So there's, if we are talking about vacuum tube preamplifiers, then there's one line that feeds the high voltage of the preamplifier, that gives the high voltage to operate the vacuum tubes, the plate voltage basically, that will be directly translated to the output signal. And there's another one that feeds the heaters of the tubes. And for cheaper units or many units, there's no rectifier after that when it's called AC heated, so it's alternating current heated, so it just uses the transformer's output. And if it uses DC heating, then it also has its own avalanche of stuff. And now this part here, the last part, is that does the filtering, the smoothing, which can include additional resistors, inductors, regulator, and capacitors as well. And it can use multiple of those stages. So this can get hyper complex, and as such it impacts the sound tremendously. But I put it as a single block because all of these things that are in front of it also affect the sound at a very fundamental level. And when people look into preamplifiers and modifying them, and companies come up with new models, they almost always just focus on that part and how it's changed. And maybe you can also read about the rectifier and power transformer. And when you see that there's attention made to have like a proper IAC jack, higher quality fuse holder, higher quality power switch, then that's where we start to see really big changes. That's where the dynamics and real resolution of details will start to come, because all of what we are doing, what the power supply is doing, is making sure that electricity is available for your unit to transform into music. Because we had the signal part here, the blocks in the signal path, they amplify the signal. But what amplification of the signal is basically taking the voltage that the power supply creates, taking that pool and modulates it with the signal that's coming through the input jack. Now, if you are modulating crap, then it doesn't matter how good your signal path is, the end result is crap. And that's why people who go into building their own preamps, or even if you are in a company and you are designing your own preamp, for God's sake, you are working at Conrad Johnson and you are coming up with the next level of preamp or the next series, then you will notice that just focusing on the gain stage alone and neglecting the power supply will give catastrophic results. And that's because in lower level preamplifiers, this part is truly atrocious. There is no attention paid to get a clean and unlimited, well, it's not unlimited, but the restriction of the current draw is little, so we try to make it as low as possible. So basically we can draw instantaneous little surges of the current that your power supply is demanding with as few limitations as possible. And when you have junk parts here, then it's not happening. However, in lower grade preamplifiers, we don't hear much the limitations of that, because the signal stage is so crappy that you will not be affected that much by the crappiness of the power supply. However, once you start upgrading your signal path, you are starting to take care of especially the wiring, the connectors. You are putting higher quality parts, higher quality volume controls. You are ditching the EQ from the system. So basically, you are getting rid of as many blocks as here we have, or even more. then you will notice that you can suddenly hear what the power supply is contributing. So at the point when this is junk and overcomplicated, you start messing around with your power supply, upgrading it. It will just bring on a minimal change. You will hear the potential of the power supply changes and upgrades only just a fraction of them. But once you have upgraded your signal path, you have fixed all the weaknesses in it, then you will be able to hear what the power supply is doing. So thank you guys for tuning in. We have one more part of this series coming up, and that's looking at what is the gain stage, what's happening inside a gain stage. And I will show specifically a vacuum tube gain stage. So please like, subscribe, have an awesome day. Bye bye.